Welcome, internet friends, to subscriber storytime number 10, and once again we faced technical difficulties. Just another thing to let you guys know, I'm going to start editing some stories for flow more often. A lot of times I get these and there's a lot of incorrect grammar, or hardly any at all, or awkward phrasing and sentencing, and narrating it can get kind of frustrating. Now, I'm not going to totally chop it up and make it completely different. I might alter awkward phrasing, change a word here and there. Again, just editing for flow here, not for content. Just letting you guys know what's good. So with that out of the way, just grab a blanket, a hot beverage, and turn down the lights. We have 5 subscriber submitted stories, and just as a warning, there are themes of self-harm and suicidal thoughts in the first story, so listen at your own discretion. I will put a little timestamp in the description to the second story if you want to skip ahead. Without further ado, turn out the lights and enjoy. From the time I was about 4 or 5, I have had a creature following me. Forgive me if I ramble, I've never told the full story to anyone else before now. It all started back when I was a baby. My mother and grandmother said I used to be able to see things that they couldn't, more specifically, a little boy I would play with and babble to when I was younger. Then, soon after my grandfather, whom I was very close with, passed away, I would talk to him and play with him. My grandmother said I would even have tea parties with him and laugh and smile so big it was like he was actually there. I'm saying this to inform you that my family wholeheartedly believes these are not hallucinations. Once I turned about 5 or 6, we were living in a townhouse in St. Paul, Minnesota. This is the first time I ever encountered an evil spirit. I remember I was walking downstairs when I felt a shove. Before I knew it, I was at the bottom of the staircase, screaming and clutching my wrist. I stared at the top of the staircase and saw a pitch-black figure with no distinguishing features, besides how it moved. I don't know how else to describe it, other than that its darkness warped and shifted like gentle waves that hit the shore following a boat, but the shifting never went outside the being's silhouette. It was about the size of a 4-year-old child, even though it was clearly not human, as it radiated pure rage and hatred. I told my mother what I saw, and she told me it was most likely my grandpa watching over me, but I knew that couldn't be it. A few months later, my grandmother, who was living with us at the time, fell down the bottom 2 steps of the same staircase with such impact it broke her hip and shattered her kneecap. There was no doubt in my mind it was due to the dark figure. Fast forward to the first house my mom and I owned. It was a small, 1-level, yellow house, not including the basement, located in St. Cloud near the Madison Elementary School. Here is a general layout of the house. I was about 7 or 8 at the time we moved in, and from the first night, it scared me shitless to be in my bedroom, or more like the hallway leading to it. I would always sleep with my mom, absolutely refusing to sleep in my room, as I always saw the figures. At this point, there was at least 2 or 3, or I would feel them watching me. She would let me sleep in her bed until her boyfriend eventually moved in with us from Bagley, Minnesota. Before he moved in, he got into a car accident. The steering wheel locked up and the car was thrown into a ditch, breaking his jaw and bursting blood vessels in his eye. Soon after this, he became extremely mentally abusive, criticizing me for anything I did or did not do, and blaming me for everything. He wrecked my self-esteem into oblivion. He wasn't like this before the accident, and my mother believes the incident caused a brain injury, but I personally believe he was possessed or changed dramatically by the creatures. Once he moved in, my mom's boyfriend forced me to sleep in my own room, no matter how much I cried and begged. It was at this point where I developed the need to sleep with the door completely closed. I wouldn't mind it being opened just a crack before, but if it was like that at all at this house, the door would open the rest of the way as I'd started to drift off to sleep. I know that we never sleep with the windows open because this area of St. Cloud was not safe. Then I would feel something intently staring at me and sometimes hear voices. I remember one specific incident when I went to sleep with the door fully closed and woke up to see it open, and once again felt something staring at me. I got up and went to the door to close it when I saw a more defined figure in the hallway, staring at me with an evil smile. I could feel its want to physically hurt me. While living in that house, marks would appear on my door, scratches, markers, crayon, and I'd get blamed for all of it, and was forced to clean it up. No one believed it wasn't me, even though at the time I possessed no markers or crayons. I wholeheartedly believed it was one of the spirits. I could tell one or two of them were kids. My mom told me soon after we moved out that she too felt the bad energy in the room she placed me in. I eventually slept in the basement room where I experienced much worse. Not so much spirits and demons as things. They'd crawl or slither across the floor and stare at me as I laid in my bed. I became scared of the dark, as these creatures were darker than black, but only barely so, making them much easier to detect and see in the light. I'd sleep with a full lamp and television on all night. Fast forward again to when we moved to a new, small town in Minnesota. When we were looking at the house, I felt an awful dread, and I pleaded with my mom to not buy it, especially after I glimpsed something in the swamp behind it. But my mom's boyfriend said I was being selfish, and I didn't have a say. I was, once again, given the master bedroom. I slept in this room with my pug. He would always alert me when something was there or approaching by raising his hackles and growling. He wouldn't sleep at night because he felt the need to guard me, because there was always something there. I remember the 4 worst parts of the house: the corner of the living room by the big window, the finished basement, the bathtub in the bathroom connected to my room, and then my little brother's room. I never left my room at night because the door to his room was always open, and there was something sitting and crouching there, always staring at me. I had to turn on every remote-controlled light in my room before I would leave my bed, and then run to wherever I was going. I turned on all the lights in the bathroom before going in, but even so, I could feel something behind the shower curtain watching me, and I remember it being scared and angry. I remember the breaking point where I refused to sleep in the master bedroom. I woke up one night to my dog leaving my arms, walking to the end of my bed, raising his hackles and barking and growling. I turned over and saw a figure the size of the door standing there. Keep in mind, this was a huge house with the doors reaching 8 feet tall at the very least. It was the same figure as before, but it had a different outline, a solid cloaked silhouette without the waves going through it, like a grim reaper. This was the most scared I've ever been, even though the figure didn't feel bad, just curious. The next morning, I realized it couldn't have been the same figure, and that there was more than one. I switched rooms with my mom soon after this. This is the room where I've experienced the most activity, where I befriended 2 spirits, a girl in her late teens and her little sister. I talked to the older one, who wore a white nightgown and had ginger, almost bright crimson hair, and she was always very sweet to me. Her name was Ruth. I have severe clinical anxiety and depression, and Ruth always kept the evil spirits out of my room. She sat up on my bed and rubbed my back when I heard scratching on my door, or the gunshots that no one else heard outside, or, overall, got so scared I cried. Her sister, however, was extremely shy and almost never spoke. Her kindness lasted about a year before she started getting angry and desperate. She would scream and yell at me for hours about how she died, and even showed me pictures in my head of it. She burned to death, slowly and painfully. I saw pictures of charred and burnt skin, boiling blood on the floor, and heard her torture-filled screams as images of her skin melting off flashed through my mind. She eventually left, and her sister retreated to the basement, where a little boy lived. After she left, I was in the loneliest and most depressed place I could ever remember, and I started self-harming and thinking about suicide. The evil beings came back, and they'd only be manageable once I bled. There was a period of time in 7th grade when I'd be so desperate for a good sleep, I'd have to do it to fall asleep. After Ruth left, I'd occasionally get more spirits coming to me, pleading for help, pleading to be let go, and I had to ignore them because I never knew what to do. I don't know how I let Ruth find peace. You don't know how hard it is to live with yourself after you ignore crying, sometimes disfigured kids, begging for help or kindness or someone to even acknowledge them. You don't know fear until this desperation shifts to anger. After a few months of this, another spirit came. This was a boy named Felix. He called me his brother, and I called him mine. This one was not trying to scare me, nor asking for help. He made everything calm down. He'd follow me everywhere and try talking to me, even though he knew I couldn't answer him in public for fear of being seen as crazy or being more of an outcast than I already was. He was my best friend and still is 2 years later. He's still there. He's no longer able to make it so I can't see everything, but he makes it so I can't hear them. I know these are not hallucinations. I've been to counselors and therapists for other unrelated mental issues and described these to all of them. One flat out called me crazy, but I later found out this counselor wasn't even registered and didn't even work there. The rest afterwards told me that it's not how hallucinations usually form in schizophrenics. It may be something else, though the counselors I've had are almost positive it's not hallucinations. My name is Riley, and back in 6th grade, I met my best friend, and her name was Maisie. She had moved from a town about a half-hour away to my town, so she was new to my school. She didn't really have many friends since she was a shy girl, but she sat at my table because the school counselor forced her to. Long story short, we started talking about shared interests and hung out after school. That summer, she invited me to go back to her old town to visit her friend Jaden, so I went to Jaden's house with her. We were spending the night and decided to stay up all night. It was around 2 a.m. when Jaden mentioned she owned a Ouija board. I know you think you know where this story is going, but you're wrong. Nothing happened. Maisie got scared, so we stopped. Jaden had 3 younger siblings. One was 8, and another around 2, and the youngest was 18 months. All were long asleep by now, so we went downstairs to Jaden's room. We heard noises upstairs, but told ourselves it was just the kids, even though we knew they were all still asleep. We ignored the sounds and continued to hang out. It was around 3 or 4 a.m. when Jaden's second youngest sibling started crying, so she went upstairs to check on him. Nothing happened the rest of the night. A few days later, I got a text from my friend. Jaden's youngest sibling had died. Somehow, he'd gotten past the child safety locks, up the stairs, and had fallen into the family's swimming pool and drowned. This didn't make much sense. When I saw that kid, he crawled or was carried. Somehow he'd crawled to open a lock that was child-proof, and no one noticed at all. I thought it was a little strange, but we didn't bring it up. My friend had already lost enough, and I thought saying anything might have caused it would just make it worse. We didn't immediately connect it to the Ouija board, and I still don't know if the events were at all connected. I don't think I want to, but I thought of something strange long after the funeral. Jaden's brother was nicknamed Baby Zoe since his name was Alonzo. I watched some more Ouija board videos and saw that Zozo was a trend among a lot of them. I didn't bring that up to anyone, but it scared me into never touching a Ouija board ever again. I grew up very poor and moved around a lot because my dad's propensity to change jobs made it difficult to live anywhere for very long. When I was 17, we were living in the poorest part of a coastal city down south. It was a ghetto, plain and simple. Prostitution and drug crimes happened out in the open on a daily basis, and the apartment complex at the end of our street was called Sewer City, partly because it housed drug dealers and registered sex offenders, but mostly because it stank. My family moved into a house on that street when I was 15, and within 2 weeks, I had been propositioned for sex by a stranger while I was walking to a friend's house. It was a pretty bad place to live, is my point. I started babysitting to earn some pocket money. On the weekends, my friends and I would take the money we had saved doing odd jobs during the week and spend it at a bowling alley shooting pool until our curfew was up at 11. But on my friend's birthday, we were given permission to stay out until 1. My dad even lent me his cell phone in case of emergency. We had a great time, hustled a couple of guys for some extra cash, and when our curfew was about up, we started to walk home. Our houses were 3 miles away from the bowling alley, and we usually followed the highway to get to them. It's brightly lit and has cars passing every so often, even in the dead of night, so it felt a little safer than taking the back roads home. As we were walking and talking, a small white pickup truck pulls up next to us. Inside is a man wearing a dirty white shirt and a baseball cap, which is all that I can see of him. He had parked in the dark space between 2 streetlights. He asked us if we wanted a ride somewhere, but his voice was weird. He was mumbling. It was kind of high-pitched and breathy, like he was trying to whisper, but at the same time speak loudly enough for us to hear him. We politely declined, and he drove away, or so we thought. After a few more minutes of walking, he drives up again from behind us, asking us again if we'd like a ride in that same weird voice, even going so far as to open his door and step out as if to let us in. Again, we said no and started walking, only much quicker. He drove off only to come to a stop about 200 yards in front of us and turn off his engine. Quickly, my friend and I ran across the currently deserted highway to the other side of the street and hid behind a building. As we stood there, sandwiched between a building and some trees, I looked out around the side of the building. His truck still sat on the side of the road where he had parked it. I was about to suggest to my friend that she and I try to sneak down the back roads when she screamed. I turned around and saw the man from the truck at the opposite corner of the building walking very quickly towards us. We ran. At first, I followed my friend who was headed towards her house. I was scared out of my mind, but I also had the sense to realize that I didn't want to lead him to my house. I had an autistic older brother and 2 younger siblings that I did not want this man to meet. So I switched gears and ran for the nearest gas station, hoping my friend would keep up. As we stepped inside the circle of light from the windows of the gas station, I remembered that I had my dad's cell phone and dialed our home number. I had to try at least 2 or 3 times before anyone picked up, and when my dad answered, I put him on speaker while my friend went inside to tell the attendant that someone was following us and to call the police. The man in the truck pulled into the gas station parking lot just in time to hear my dad say, "Where are you?" through the truck's open window. He saw my friend point at him while talking to the attendant inside, which I guess was enough to spook him. He took off very fast out of the parking lot and down the highway and didn't come back. I tried to get a look at his plate number as he drove away, only to realize that there wasn't a plate at all. My dad showed up before the police, chastising me for staying out late, even though he had given me permission. The police asked us to describe the man in the truck, but he had done a good enough job scaring us and staying out of the light that we never saw him very clearly. All we could remember was the dirty shirt and baseball cap. The police never found this person, as far as we know, and I've never seen him since. I do wonder sometimes if he found someone else who wasn't so quick to refuse his offer for a ride, and what might have happened to them. This all started before I was born. My parents knew of this psychic, and she went by the name Donna Carmen. She was well known, and people were convinced she had supernatural powers. My father once told me a story of how she was able to explain, in detail, what he was wearing to her own daughter before he even arrived. One day, Carmen told my parents that, down the line, someone would be coming after us. The presence would take the form of an owl and would land on a palm tree in our backyard. Now, Carmen had never been out to the house. Heck, she didn't even know where we lived. My parents thought she was just fooling around and were unconcerned. Eventually, my parents lost contact with her and had, for the most part, forgotten about what she had said. Once I was older, about 9 or 10, my parents had gotten rid of that palm tree in our backyard. Not because they thought of the owl, but because the tree was dying. One day I remember hearing this loud screech. I look over my shoulder to the window that overlooks the side of our backyard. I see nothing, but then I hear the screech again. My mom comes out of her room and asks me if I heard it. I said yes and told her that it was coming from the backyard. We look out the window, then look down, and a barnyard owl is staring right back at us. I freak out because, for one, it was creepy, but also because we lived in a city/suburb setting. Anything besides dogs or cats was super strange to see. Every night for the next few years, either a single owl or a group of owls would always land on the platform that used to hold our palm tree. During the process of all these owls showing up at our house, my mother eventually told me the story of Carmen and what she had said years ago. I eventually grew fearful of the birds. Their large black eyes terrified me. However, the owls were not all that happened. One time, after coming home from school, it was nighttime, and from the corner of my eye, I saw this thing. I quickly turned my head and it was no longer there. I concluded that it must have just been something I thought I saw. However, my mom was looking in the same direction as I was, and she asked me if I saw it. Now, I could never explain completely how this thing looked, and my lack of artistic abilities did not let me draw it out either. The closest resemblance I have ever found was a painting called The Anguished Man. It had no eyes, and its mouth was open beyond what a human was capable of. Its skin was this rotten, dark purple color. Another instance happened late at night. I was watching television in my room when slowly, this white static-like glitch appears. I felt very unsettled as this glitch moved across the screen as slowly as possible, loud static sounds emitting from my TV. In the background, an episode of Kim Possible was still playing. At this point, I was very scared, and I had to sleep with my stuffed animal every day. If I did not have him, I would be too terrified to sleep in my own room. My mother and father eventually had had enough after a few years and decided to take a trip down to Mexico to consult with a man. This man was seen as very knowledgeable in the supernatural, specifically religious occurrences. He let my father know that something was after us. He also let him know that those figures we were seeing were signs that they were getting closer to us. The man then gave my mother this oil and told her to throw a bit of it around our entire house every night while reciting Our Father. Then, once the oil was finished, we were to travel back to him so he could perform a cleanse on all of us. We eventually finished the oil, traveled back, and were cleansed. It's been a good 4 years since the cleanse happened, and we have not seen a figure or owl since. Sometime around when middle school ended and high school began, my mom was commissioned to build the set for a local production of the play Annie. The play was to take place in this old, church-turned theater, and since it was summertime, I went along to help. This theater already had a good number of stories about activity, and there were lots of super creepy places in it. I hated going down to the bathrooms or the prop storage alone, and I never went into the kitchen or backstage tunnel. I stayed close to my mom while we were there. At the end of the day, we had to do a walk around and make sure everything was in order before we left, theater owner's request. While we worked, we were locked in. Mom had the keys, but the doors were all kept locked. One day, we were doing our rounds, getting ready to leave, and were passing through the prop storage, checking that everything was good, and for the most part, it was. Prop storage was on the lower level, technically the basement. It had row on row of costumes hanging up, and one wall was lined with pianos. I remember we were told specifically to make sure the key covers were all down. While we were down there, I saw some of the costumes shift, like something was moving among them, something I couldn't see. And it definitely wasn't the wind or a draft because it was only the costumes in a small, localized area. I told my mom, but she dismissed it. After our walkthrough, we started moving our supplies back to Mom's car, and I was holding the door so it wouldn't lock us out. As my mom walked back and forth with boxes of paints, ribbon, and assorted miscellany, I started to hear the sound of a piano being played. Slowly, at first, one note at a time, as if someone was trying to overcome stage fright. Eventually, I could start to pick out a song among the notes when my mom came back over and heard the sounds as well. Abruptly, the notes stopped, and we went down to investigate. 3 pianos down, the key cover was raised on one of the oldest pianos of the bunch. None of them were player pianos or had any automated parts. We knew there was no one else there since all of the doors were locked up till that point, and I had been standing at the only open door since. My mom lowered the key cover and we finished packing up. The piano never resumed its solo, and I never went into the prop storage room again. The play, however, ran for 4 nights without a problem. Special thanks to Anonymous, Riley, Alexandria, Magma, and IMS. We've got some little strange names today for sharing their stories with us today. If you had a personal terrifying encounter you've had, it can be paranormal or not, please feel free to send subscriberstorytime@gmail.com, and your experience might end up in the next subscriber storytime. If you wish to stay anonymous, please mention that in your email. Thank you for listening, to the end of today, and if you liked the video, it would really help me out to leave a like and a comment down below. Just for me, please. And if you aren't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos from me. Stay safe, friends, and have a good night.